Good morning. Welcome to The Biz Trail Guide. My name is Phil Daniels. I'm an entertainment attorney working primarily in digital media. I run, co-own, manage, and founded a law firm in Beverly Hills called Ginsburg Daniels. We work with production companies, studios, networks, celebrity, influencer talent. Clients range from the likes of Verizon Go 90 to Refinery 29. To multi-channel networks, to celebrity influencers. And I'm very proud and happy to be here. I have we have a wonderful panel here with us today. On the left, we have Scott Iason from CAA. We have Gabe Gordon from Reach Agency and Catherine McEvoy from Forefront Partners. And I'd like for them to each give literally 2 minutes max, just a little intro about themselves and why they're here and the value they're going to add to this panel today.
Great. I'm Scott Iason again from CAA in our brand talent partnership and group. And my background is I've been CAA for about 3 years, and I was about 10 years on the brand side. So I was at Clorox for 10 years and a company called Reckitt Benckiser, really getting them into the entertainment world with celebrities and platforms. So I came over to CAA about 3 years ago within this group to kind of help bridge the gap between brands, agencies, and our clients.
Excellent.
Cool. Gabe Gordon, I'm the co-founder of Reach Agency. We're a social video agency that works with Nestle, Purina, AB InBev, Hallmark, to name a few. And before forming this company 5 years ago, I worked at WME and Pepsi.
My name is Catherine McEvoy. I work at Forefront Partners. We started around 3 years ago, and I've had the pleasure of working with just about everyone up here, but
was it really that pleasurable?
Well, yes.
Not us.
We can talk off record later if you want.
Good.
No, it's been great. We kind of span the gamut of entertainment projects, and a lot of our brand clients include Marriott, Nestle. We work with Reach, and so his clients are kind of like our clients, but we do business affairs legal, and we advise on business development and strategy, and especially as brands are starting these content studios and having a more long-term approach with the kinds of projects that they create, talking about IP ownership and how to structure deals with talent and things like that so that it's in their best interest and they can start building that IP library.
Great. Well, I'm going to set this up for literally 2 minutes. So I have to make a confession to you all. Wait for it. I'm confused. I have been working in this space for quite some time in digital media, and I've never been in such an evolving landscape of new SVOD platforms appearing, disappearing, social media influencers here today, gone tomorrow, and it's just, I personally have had to adjust my own legal practice and business quite regularly over a period of 3 to 6 months because everything changes so quickly. This creates challenges and opportunities, definitely for the various stakeholders in the field. My experience, it's been very much the Wild West, and I think what we want to do is really kind of uncover a lot of that today. I want to see how this has affected the business and the deal making around the industry, and what we can do as a group to kind of create a greater efficiency and a flow of dollars and value into the chain to create opportunity for all. And I thought the best way to do this would be to actually just sort of cover 3 areas for this panel discussion around like branded content influencer projects. So specifically looking at talent, brands and talent, how they interact, content production and content development and production, and also then to distribution and exploitation. And I think those areas can really highlight very much so some of the hot button issues. And then obviously after we've done our session, we have 3 really well thought out questions. We spent literally an hour and a half at the bar last night trying to figure it out. So I hope that you will see the value in them just as much as we did. So let's talk about talent. So I want to actually target you, Catherine, with this, because you do a lot of work with production companies, brands, and talent, and I think it would just be a good educational experience to really talk about, you know, what you've seen in the marketplace in terms of how brands are interacting with talent, what deals look like, just very general, because obviously we'll go into a lot more depth, and we don't have a ton of time, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll be able to add stuff in, but I think, you know, there's kind of a common theme that has in all the trails where it kind of starts with, you know, the brand or the client will come and they'll have a piece of content in mind. So we have to ask questions, you know, what are the long-term, short-term goals of this? You know, is it just a one-off thing that's introducing a product, or is it a year-long relationship with a talent or an influencer that's been targeted as on brand and on message, and they want to build a very long-term relationship? Is it something that's episodic with the idea that, you know, this is actually a format that could be licensed later down the road and sold? So, you know, and who's bringing the idea? Did talent come to us with a great idea that we want to get behind? So, you know, it's all fact-based, and you really have to ask a lot of questions and get the brand to really focus in on what the overall goals are so that you can figure out the best way to construct a talent deal. But, you know, we've done everything from doing development deals with certain talent that have been targeted as on brand and on message and who they want a relationship with. And then we kind of, you know, we'll say, if you bring us, it's your idea, then, you know, you can own it. Or maybe we collaborate, we do this together, we're co-producers, we own it 50-50. Are we pulling you in to just appear in a commercial, and then you're just kind of treated, you know, we have a list of talent and we cross them off the list and then just plug them in and pay them an on-camera fee. And
so really there's just a standard sort of brand integration, like one video type project.
Yeah, I mean,
or, you know, give us a flavor of some of the things that maybe you can talk about that you worked on, which could demonstrate a few of those sort of overall types of deal structures. And Scott, Gabe, feel free to jump in. I just want to kind of just give a very general idea of the landscape. So,
you know, we've done sponsored videos with talent where, you know, the talent actually kind of pitches a creative brief, and, you know, we did a music video for Butterfinger, and on that, the talent was the producer, and he had some light approval processes, and he got to own, you know, the video. And then, you know, we've worked on a partnership with Discovery with Marriott, and we had a traditional talent, you know, Jordan Peele, and it was a SAG deal. So that's like a whole nother animal, you know, and the way that you structure those deals, you know, has to be compliant with SAG, and, you know, it's very different from something like we did a sponsorship, or just even an integration into someone's existing format of their vlog, where it's, you know, just a 30-second mention within that episode.
Right.
Well, sorry. Go ahead. To take one huge step back is that there's, at least what we're seeing on the agent side, is there's never been a better time. Like, there's a lot of confusion that you mentioned. There's a lot of all this, like, how do we get deals done? But between brands and talent, whether it be digital influencer talent or traditional talent that has influence, that brands are kind of respecting talent's audiences and the process way better than they have before. We have to take small steps here. We're far away from where we want to be, but also talent is coming to us saying, hey, we really are understanding the brand's voice, the brand ethos. Like, we want to partner with brands, not because we want a quick paycheck, because we actually want a long-term partnership. So the conversation has really shifted in that way, which is very positive, because both groups are coming with a mutual understanding of what they want to get out of a partnership. Then you get to the deal-making fun stuff, and lawyers like yourself, and we have to figure all that out.
And is this traditional talent that you?
It's absolutely traditional talent, and I think that.
And do you see any kind of variation in the approach, whether it's traditional, digital, in terms of the mentality and the culture? Yeah, because I mean, there's the education we need to do to our traditional talent that are used to traditional endorsement deals, where this and the angle we take is it's not.
depending on what the creative is, this is not a purely endorsement deal. This is a content partnership that is over a longer period of time. This is not a one and done situation, which it doesn't feel as transactional. It feels like, okay, I'm part of the brand. I see the brand wants to be part of my world, part of my audience, and how can we collaborate together versus being like, can we just borrow you and your likeness for a specific term and then I'm out.
Yeah.
The partnership aspect has really bubbled up, which is allowing for more real conversations and better work.
I think what's interesting now is, you had your social native deals, which was the integrations or the original content, social sharing. But what's happening now is as this talent's getting bigger, more recognizable, and reaching a celebrity status, you're actually seeing legacy, talent services come back in play, whether it is, hey, I want you to be an actor in my commercial, or, we're doing a deal now where a social influencer is going to do the score just for a commercial. So you go back to sort of the old deals of appearances and typical endorsement deals, which these, new talent are now more relevant in doing.
Right. Well, I think that actually leads us into an interesting area, which is in terms of talent and pricing. And I know, Gabe, you have some strong thoughts about that. I mean, for brands out here, like getting into bed with talent, like in my observation experience, there isn't a level playing field. Like, what do you pay? How do you work that out? Is it a services specific proposition, or is it more of like an ad unit, media buy type situation? Perhaps give us a little bit of flavor around pricing and viewpoints around that.
Yeah, I think everybody knows it's sort of the Wild West when it comes to pricing. With influencers, and you're always balancing sort of a media end of the equation versus an endorsement and a content and delivery end of the equation. And and this is a problem on the creator end too. There's no standardized pricing for creators to understand what they should be charging for that area. So and it's something that brands grapple with a lot when they're looking at what ROI. Are they just looking to get sentiment? Are they comparing it to a media equivalent value? If they're getting 50% of their target audience in an influencer's post organically, and they equivalent that to like a CPV, is that how they should be calculating ROI? So I do think it's a bigger conversation. I think the way we talk to a lot of people about it is, there is an implied endorsement value, which is driving your sentiment. You are being endorsed by a piece of talent. You also are getting content, so I always ask brands, what would you pay your agency to make that piece of content? And then there is the distribution end of it, and although it might not be as efficient as doing your own media buy, you are still getting that paid distribution. So it's really weighing those three categories and determining, hey, was that worth my investment?
Right. Do you think there should be greater transparency between brand, publisher, and talent in terms of how the dollars are flowing and how it's all being calculated? I mean, do you feel like there's too much of a middleman situation where talent aren't getting what they deserve because they're not seeing what's being taken in the middle? Or I thought it'd be a little controversial.
Yeah, it definitely is a little controversial depending on which entity is bringing the deal in. Sitting again on the talent side, when we work direct with brands, it's a much clearer communication most of the time. When we work through RFPs or an agency partner, we don't have the full view. So it becomes more transactional that way, and it becomes more black box. But when we work directly, when the agency opens it up to the brand, or when we are having direct conversations with a brand, talent, at least a lot of talent, not all talent, are totally transparent and open, and a lot of talent are open to putting kind of the money where their mouth is, saying, we will get these amount of organic views. You just have to recognize it as in a fair CPV or a fair CPM, and not treat it like a casting deal. You have to treat it like media. You have to treat it like we're reaching millions of people. And so there's been some hybrid deals that we've done where we have a certain amount that's guaranteed and a certain amount of upside, whether that upside be on the CPV or whether that upside be equity in the company.
Performance metrics for the talent.
Yeah, I mean, talent's got to get on board with it too, right?
Right.
Not all talent, but
I mean, like a Logan
talent.
Paul post, $100 grand a post or whatever it may be, but there's higher, now. But where's the value to that? I mean, how do you measure that performance and value from for brands out here, for example? How do they know they're going to get their ROI on that?
Yeah, I mean,
just a named
I think Kate mentioned in the last one regarding ROI to how many bottles of Coke are sold from that. Like, I don't have the answer to that, right? I have the answer to, or have an approach to the media spend and the exposure and the reach and the target that they're reaching. I have that perspective. But
the
as
engagement and translation conversion.
Again,
I mean, that's the challenge for a lot of the folks out here.
Totally, but I mean, all these, Gabe sits on a ton of data and insights. We are building that, in fact, internally, a capability to try and get to those answers. I know brands are with their regression analyses and all that kind of stuff, but it is vitally important. But I'd be lying if I told you I knew exactly what his ROI was, but I can tell you that what he's looking for, or what they're looking for in terms of the CPV or the CPM, is in line with what brands are spending in media without the engagement.
But do you think influencers are going towards more of a media equivalent, or traditional talent?
Honestly, I think that they're going to go towards where the budgets are coming from, right? And so a lot of the money sits within media, so they're going to have to play within media metrics or KPIs to some degree. Yeah. I think everybody would rather have a blank check and say, hey, we're just going to make a video and what happens happens. Mm-hmm. But brands are too smart for that, right?
I mean, in my experience, I've just seen the influencers just very cash driven. They don't care so much about. I mean, is that your experience? It's like they just want a number. They don't want to be doing.
Yeah, I guess I disagree only from the standpoint of, I think there are, call it 95% of influencers that may be that way. Yeah. But when you're talking about the influencers that are crossing platforms and going into TV and going into film and kind of bigger overall, they're looking at, we phrase it as paychecks versus, partnerships versus paychecks, right? Broader partnerships where it's longer term, where they're not doing a new brand thing every 3 months, where they have some long-term upside in the company. So we've done kind of 360 deals with talent that have media metrics in that, have services rendered in it, but also have something that they feel like they have to feel like they're part of it.
Product sales in certain cases, have you managed to get that?
We have managed to get not direct product sales, but we've managed to get performance in the quarters, from the company. Because if you go, specifically for a product, how do you get the halo effect of Coke to Diet Coke, or I don't know how you guys work, but there is certainly a halo effect of partnering with any one brand.
Certain brands, if their product makes sense, can do affiliate deals with influencers, and they can get, sort of points on the sales that they drive.
Right. I mean, there's a huge difference between, how you define an influencer today. Yeah. Is it the 0.001% who's right at the top, or is it the 99.999%, the long tail? Yeah. Anyway, any closing thoughts on the talent piece before we move on to the next section?
I would just say that there's a real opportunity for, and I think it's a white space for brands to engage with talent from the start, not that's closer to them versus the RFP process. We spent a lot of time in our breakout group talking about the RFP process as it pertains to agencies and brands, but not really how it connects to talent. Because at the end of the day, talent's going to have to, in a lot of cases, talent's going to have to perform. Talent's going to have to bring the story to the brand. And if they're kind of a very long arm's distance away from brands, it just doesn't start from the right place.
Yeah, I'd also echo the multi-year deals and the long-term relationships. We've seen nothing but high value from those.
So then, so obviously then you're dealing with exclusivity provisions around that, because locking the talent up, there's got to be significant.
A lot of our guys rather do 1 or 2 long-term deals and 50 small-term deals. Right. So that's great.
Okay, good. Moving on to development and production of content. I'm curious, we focused obviously on the talent part, but I'd like to focus a little more now on the financing part of it, how brands are financing and producing content, and what sort of models they're looking at in that regard. Mm-hmm. And really sort of leading into a discussion about the role and the identity of the brand, as maybe a studio, becoming a studio. I mean, plenty of examples of that now. A platform. So what are you seeing in that? How have you seen that marketplace evolve? Gabe?
I think brands can get content from everywhere, including make it themselves now. And I think there has, as brands have moved more towards entertainment programming and not just advertising, the ability for them to, fund that, beyond, a media sponsor deal, a publisher deal, is always been them just paying for it all themselves. But what's interesting to me is if you look within the entertainment business, if you make a movie, no one's paying for it all themselves. There's always multiple financiers, whether it is a studio, private equity, or multiple production partners. And so that it's just interesting to me that there's so many ways that you can produce with different partners in the entertainment business, but that hasn't quite rolled out.
And why do you think that's the case?
There's a lot of reasons. I think one, it's still very new for brands actually who, the very few brands who actually create content that people would want to watch, that would want it to be monetized, is one thing. But there's nothing to say that a company like a Marriott and a Delta couldn't do a movie together about travel. So there are multiple ways that brands together can finance something. We just did a VR project with Haagen-Dazs and HTC both funding it. So there are like little things popping up here and there. But
what was the value proposition in that situation then, from a VR project?
Exclusivity on the content distribution.
Right.
So and again, when you're making a movie or if you're making a series, you're going to sell first window of distribution. And so the question is, can brands do that? Because typically they're paying for that window of distribution and not selling it.
Right. So basically what you're saying is there's a model beyond just an ad unit kind of distribution, right?
Yeah, from a distribution perspective, but also from a financing perspective too.
Right. Okay. And so, Catherine, in terms of some of these new models, what have you seen in terms of brands, financing, looking more specifically now at the legal and business affairs issues around that, in terms of IP ownership, that type of thing?
A lot of the brands, as I mentioned, I work with brands that are doing purely entertainment-based type content with less of a ad or marketing drive behind it, and mostly larger brands who are financing it all themselves and distributing it themselves on their own kind of platforms. And what I think there's a longer term goal for a lot of them, and it's really interesting now because we're a couple years after we started a scripted franchise for Marriott. There's been some bite of interest to get outside financing to turn that into a feature. And that's exactly kind of why Marriott started what they started. And so it's kind of encouraging to see over time these types of things actually materialize and manifest. But at the outset of that, knowing that that was kind of the end goal for that, we made sure that the brand retained all IP ownership, because that's kind of where the potential for revenue comes in down the line.
Right.
See, that's the rub sometimes on our end, right? Like the IP ownership piece, and that depending on what brands really want to do with the content, when you want to get in business with talent, they're, like I said, on the positive side, they want to do a ton of stuff. The movie business and making less movies, more franchise movies. TV's difficult, a lot of red tape, takes forever to get from point A to point B to something final. So the idea to partner with brand as an enabler is a huge upside and huge factor for talent, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. But they want to do it so they can go and own the IP, right? A lot of them, they want to do it. That doesn't mean brands can't participate in monetization as the content goes through different windows, but that is a huge upside for them. So when brands are engaging with talent, when they say, hey, look, we're going to help fund this, we're going to help make this happen, you get to own the IP, we get a piece of the back end, if you will. Mm-hmm. That is, you're going to get more high-end talent that way than you are, hey, we're going to own everything because we're going to be the studio model, just like you've done in film your whole lives, and then you're going to have nothing to do with it afterwards, right?
I think for brands too, it's mostly about being able to use the content in their own marketing communications, not so much getting a check. I mean, most brands would know where to cash the check. But I mean, it's, brands have had to go through such a budgeting exercise in the past couple of years to not only, make so much more content, but the level of brand entertainment content, it's so expensive, it's not sustainable. So I think naturally where they can find co-financing opportunities and also benefit, whether it's funding talent passion projects or, partnering up with other financiers to tell the same story, I think that's sort of part of the future for production.
But I think there are things that brands can be thinking about, obviously, in terms of when they're getting into these development projects. Because if they're smaller projects that are starting off online and they can go into much larger scale projects off digital, there are things that we would put in those deals to allow the brand to continue to be attached to those bigger projects and participate. Yep. From my perspective, I would love to see brands taking more of an approach of being a studio and an owner and actually thinking about some of those issues.
What do you mean by studio?
Just being an owner of the content and being able to think about off-platform opportunities and growing their business that way, because I think there is, it's very easy for a brand to say, oh, well, we don't worry about ownership, we'll just have some participation. But there is real value in having ownership of IP.
I think I think it really goes back again to what I started with is, each deal you have, it's very fact-based. So you have to look at all the factors surrounding it to determine whether it makes sense to be a co-owner, to be a rev share, to own everything. And you have to understand all the implications in order to structure your deal right each time. And I've gotten on the phone with so many people and they hear work for hire and they're like, nope, no deal. And it's like, well, let's, make sure we all understand, because, does your client really have any future to monetize this content that they're doing for us? Whereas maybe we could, take it and put it into a cookbook or put it into something larger, into a larger library. So, the ownership thing, I think, is a huge issue that a lot of people don't really understand, and they don't think, of all the different factors that can lead you to, what the best strategy is in that sense.
You seem like you're nodding about something.
I'm just thinking like brands typically, there's a bunch there's some that do that are really kind of advanced in the space, but they don't know how to take a piece of content, meaning like a real true piece of IP, because it's not their core competency, and then go take it internationally, go take it to a second window, go take it, right? It's not what you do every day. You're not staffed, you're not resourced that way, and that's okay. Because there's people that can do it and do it and know how to do it and can hopefully make not only the project better, but also the back-end monetization better for you. So I think that if
they can still own a piece
staffed,
of IP even if they're not controlling the rights to distribute it.
right, that's true.
Let's talk about union issues.
Favorite.
Actually, when we were having drinks, all of us, we mentioned a few things about unions and the impact on projects and producing content. And maybe actually, Gabe, talk to us a little bit about your experience with dealing with unions and how you integrate them into the projects and some of the pitfalls that we need to watch out for. And then, Catherine, I want to come to you and sort of figure out or explain some of the areas in that regard too.
Sure.
Yeah, I think so. A couple of our clients, as corporations, are SAG signatories, so every project has to be union, and it gets really prohibitive, basically. I think someone mentioned it earlier in one of the sessions, but when union and guild fees are making your non-working costs be way higher than your working costs, and you can't either have a piece of content up for long enough to make it work hard enough for you, or even as we're talking about true brand entertainment, like have something that can have multiple windows of distribution because you're paying so many residuals. It becomes a really big issue, and it's actually going to hurt the talent more than the union, I think, has set out to really help them.
All right. Catherine.
So this is a really interesting topic for me because, as I mentioned, the types of branded content that you can make, there's a huge scope and spectrum along that line. And for with Gabe and his client that's a SAG signatory, they're signatory to the commercials contract. So a lot of times, it's, I want to encourage them to do, maybe some episodic stuff that we could argue doesn't fall within a commercial. So then they can operate outside of the SAG rules. But I think, understanding that there's multiple SAG agreements and, looking at it, you decide where it falls by looking at the actual creative of it. Is it character driven? Is it scripted? Is it episodic? Or is it a commercial? And you figure that out. But, there's been, unless you understand where it is and you can't know what the implications are in your budget and everything else, with PHW and having to account for all of that, So
There are ways to structure agreements such that
yes, I was just about
pension health and welfare doesn't attach?
Yes. So a lot of times when we do these deals, there are multi-services involved. So, maybe someone's appearing on camera and then they're also doing some posts on social media, maybe in-person appearances at events and whatnot. So what we like to do is separate and do two completely independent standalone contracts. So then you can cut your costs because then you allocate, a very even you could do scale, for the on-camera stuff, and then only pay, the PH&W on top of that, and then you kind of, get to break everything else off, and, argue that a lot of these influencers, their main value is in the in-person or the posting. So you can kind of, be cute about it and weigh the fee so that you avoid a lot of those penalties. So that's typically what we try to do in those situations.
Scott, do you have a viewpoint?
I go to my buddy, he's actually right here, Matt Wynn's office, and I say, what do I do? That's what I ask. and he...
No, but like union versus non-union, especially where you're working on the talent side and the brand side, also, like, how do you marry that up?
We do it a lot of the ways that Catherine was describing, is that we figure out what are the kind of the commercial aspects of it versus the posting aspects of it, which parts are SAG, truly are SAG, and it's still subjective to decide what portion of it, and then sometimes brands, and we talked about this morning, want to kind of relate agreements together, like tie them together pursuant to this agreement, and that kind of makes the whole agreement. No, you can't do that. So honestly, like we spend a lot of time with our internal legal and then the brand's legal trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, what is the most efficient thing to do so that talent can feel good about doing it while the brand feels good that they're not kind of going against any regulations.
Well, Phil, do any of your clients not want to be in SAG? I mean, because...
I was going to bring that point up.
Yeah.
SAG, if you guys don't know, one, they have the global one rule. So once you're in SAG, you can only work for a SAG signatory. And then the second part of that is, if the production SAG and you Taft-Hartley someone in that isn't a union member, they only get 2 projects, SAG projects, before they're obligated to join the union. So it's a little effed up, I think, but that's the way it is, and you have to really understand that, and the talent has to understand, because sometimes, they don't want to come within that cocoon, and they'll be like, no, thank you, like, don't want to do this.
The challenge is a lot of these influencers are working in other projects outside of this one project, and a lot of those projects may be non-union, and once the talent gets Taft-Hartley'd in and becomes union, they're precluded in many ways from working on non-union projects, and that's the challenge, because then they'll be in breach of their Global Rule 1.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, then as a buyer too, I mean, that's where it's going to start getting interesting, where talent's going to say, I'm not going to participate in if it's a SAG project. So.
I mean, there's the argument is that everything should be union because that's where you get the higher level talent and all of that. And the unions, I mean, Catherine, I'm sure you probably share my experience. Over the years, the unions have become far more almost diligent in checking in on projects, and
they're big giant beasts. They need to fund themselves. They've got to look for people to target and get money out of them.
And they require more disclosure.
I hope no one here is an employee of the unions. I'm sorry.
And just to add though, I think the brands, they want to make sure talent's being paid appropriately. They want to make sure, all the ideals of the union, I think brands very much want to make sure are upheld. It's just sometimes in the execution of the current structure, it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah, I think, SAG's got good intentions, but they're so behind on with the pace that things are evolving and the different ways that people are making content. And so in their mind, they're doing something to protect a lot of these digital influencers, when in fact they're actually prohibiting them and limiting them.
I can't even get hold of them when I call.
Right, well, and it's funny because even if you try to do things right and you have a question, you could call 30 different times, you get 30 different answers. That's and none of them really even understand their own MBA. So it can be challenging to all around to do a union production.
So we don't have much time left, unfortunately. But one of the areas I did want to dive into before we close is this area of brand safety. And as you know, it's been a very big issue of late, with a lot of brands pulling off platforms like YouTube because of influencers like PewDiePie with racist and hatred speech. And other examples recently of brands pulling out of deals with influencers because of influencer antics. So kind of pulling all this together from talent to production to distribution. What's going on in the brand world in terms of protecting or ensuring brand safety in terms of technology and other areas? And maybe Gabe, Scott, you can speak to that. And then I want to, Catherine, maybe mention a few things that brands can do and with their agreements for protecting that type of thing.
Yeah, it's a very big issue. It's a big liability for brands, and it goes from an influencer level. If you look with influencers, they don't have the built-in system that a TV network or a film studio has of an MPAA or standards and practices that's really controlling everything they make and controlling the message before it goes out. So it is a big risk factor, and it's that influencers are harder to control than maybe a more media-driven solution that can scan content and understand what's in there. But right now, most people, they'll physically look at whether it's a 30 to 90-day cycle of an influencer's content, but they can never guarantee what is coming up. And any agreement right now, you really, if you got all the protections you needed, you would never be able to do a deal with somebody.
Right.
And so it is a big issue that I think definitely needs some sort of technology solution. And so yeah, again, influencers, but even with media buying too, knowing not only getting to the right audience, but knowing contextually where that's served up. And that's it's a huge area where publishers are actually amazing to work with right now because they control their own ecosystems and. But brands need scale, so there needs to be that solution beyond publishers.
And why is it such an important issue?
Brands are multi-billion-dollar companies, and for them to have any liability on, I don't care how big the influencer is or how big the platform is from a scale perspective, it's not worth the risk in damaging that brand.
All right, and Catherine, so how do you protect brands or ensure talent don't F up?
Well, we can't ensure that they don't F up, but we can give brands the tools that they need to get out of that deal, to remove and take down content that associates them with that person. Morality clauses and disparagement clauses are built into every brand deal we do, and take down rights as well. So I think that those are a couple of the main things that I've seen that people do in order to protect themselves. And we've been successful in kind of doing a very broad language of what counts as a breach of the morality clause, so that the brand can have a lot of leeway and discretion when someone does something that's maybe a little off color, but maybe not so extreme as what PewDiePie did. But you have to manage your reputation and the association that people have with your brand and the goodwill and trademarks and all of that. Like, it's very important to have those rights. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of this and knowing that these provisions are key when they're working with influencers, and especially ones that you're establishing long-term relationships with.
I think what's lost in a lot of the conversations when you're having it at a talent level is the protection actually goes both ways. Brands get recalls, brands get pulled into corporate scandals.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they need to take content down to also protect the talent as well.
Yeah.
They don't get dragged into that as well.
Yeah, well, and that helps when you get pushback on the language. So then you have a way to frame it where it's like it's actually in your interest too. If pizza or something has a crazy recall, and you want us to be able to take that, so your association with it is, controlled and monitored.
Great. Well, that brings us to the close of this part of the program. I'd like to just now give you the 3 questions that I'd like you to ponder on and discuss in our breakout groups. And those 3 questions are as follows. 1, what business models may exist for brands creating content beyond traditional sponsorship and media buy? 2, in terms of brand safety, how can brand value be protected in the content distribution chain? And 3, should there be a standardized pricing model for celebrity-driven digital campaigns to ensure transparency and consistency across the value chain. And I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you,
Thank you.
panel,
Yeah.
and thank you.
Panel. Thanks so much.